You are busier than everyone who reports to you. And somewhere along the way, you decided that's leadership. Most managers say they are sure they delegate well. The people who work for them typically say differently. Welcome to this mini but mighty leadership series on leading alongside AI. This episode sets the foundation for delegation and collaboration. I was raised by a high achieving mother, the kind of female that makes the rest of us sort of quake in comparison, even though we're not supposed to compare. She is an accomplished pianist, a talented artist, an excellent writer. Birth mother to four, stepmother to more, she opened and founded two businesses, just one of which provided silk floral arrangements and catering to huge parties with hundreds of people. She was a one-woman machine for most of it, but when it came to those big parties, help was required. There was hired staff, but there were also four children. We were roped in early and given specific responsibilities and the autonomy to own those. She knew if we didn't do something, but she expected us to do our job, make it happen, and do it right. She was available for guidance and support, but she was off handling this elite orchestration of all the things it takes to handle a big catering job. And that is delegation. Now, let me compare this to an exec that I reported to. This is the part that sometimes trips us up when we talk about delegation. We think we've delegated, but we've actually abdicated. This executive had talented, accomplished senior leaders reporting into them, and we were running massive parts of the division. Each of us were allowed to do our own thing, to say what we were planning and how it aligned to the overall divisional strategy, but also to self-report on whether it was working well or not. And the trick here is that unlike my mother, who knew the catering process from end to end, she would know if something was out of place or lacking and missing. This leader didn't know the detailed aspects of the business, and while making best efforts to question, to analyze, they were mostly relying on the leaders reporting into them to know and do what they each individually thought was best. This is more aligned with abdication of responsibility, because if we had failed, we were on our own. And if we needed guidance or support, we had to go find it somewhere else. If one of us left, the leader would be guessing at how to keep their department running. Let's take a different example. I know an SVP of sales at a manufacturing company who said to me straight out that he could make the company a lot more money if he didn't have to spend so much time on his team. And he meant it. He's not lazy. He's not a cold person. He's actually really good at sales. That's what he knows and enjoys doing. He carries his own number and supports other members on his team with their sales activities, but considers anything outside of sales activity to be a waste of time. He hasn't learned and also doesn't have much interest in developing his team for other skills or dealing with their, what he calls, people problems. The real work to him is selling, and he's so good at it, he got himself promoted and promoted again and gained more staff that reported to him. And that team is essentially a tax that he pays in order to be the SVP. He wants his team focused on selling. And trust me when I say there are a lot of sales executives who feel this way. If there's something else that needs doing, like proposals or contracts, customer meetings, even helping another part of the organization, this guy's going to handle it himself or get rid of it if possible. He believes he can do things faster and easier, and he wants less distraction for his sales team. He wants to just take care of the problem, move it along so his team can sell. Some of you may think I'm kidding, but I have lots of stories like this. I'm picking on sales. It's not just in sales. I know a COO who is exhausted from the pile of work on her plate, but she doesn't feel like her team is mature enough to take on more responsibility. She believes that she has explained the objective and left them to get work done, and when she comes back, it's not the way she wants it to be done. So they go back to the drawing board, and she gets tired of that cycle and just decides to pick up the work and do it herself. But thinking she's being a good leader, she'll sit everybody down afterwards and tell them what she did, kind of quickly rushing through it, summarizing, and then move on to the next item on her list. She thinks she's helping them learn how to do this. But frankly, because she does it herself, they don't have an opportunity to learn how to do it. And this is how a lot of our leaders operate. Many of them find it to be a delay or a tax to develop people because they have to take time away from their regular work to go help people learn how to do things. And most leaders are really well-intentioned. They are going to put some effort towards this. But when they can't take it, the time pressure's too much, they just pick up and do the work themselves. And that's because nobody ever really taught them that leading the work is different than doing the work. John Hunt at London Business School studied this for years and found that only about 30% of managers believe they delegate well. And of that 30%, their own teams rate only 1 in 3 as actually good at delegation. So that means that for every manager who's sure that they're delegating, 2 out of 3 of them are wrong. They don't delegate well. The skill is rare, And the people who do delegate well typically can't see it in themselves. They wouldn't say that they delegate well. So let's talk about some common misconceptions about delegation. It isn't something you do when there's spare time or when there's a lull in work. Maybe we can try and help develop these people or delegate some tasks to them and help them along. Not that. It also isn't saying, hey, could you do this? And then come back at the end and find out that because you didn't sit down and discuss the project, the outcomes, the resources, etc., it's not the way you want it. Telling somebody to do something, expecting that they know what you mean, and then evaluating the end product and finding it lacking, that's not delegation. It also isn't you being generous by allowing somebody to get experience and exposure by taking something off your plate. It could be, but only when done with supportive coaching attention to help them learn and have real opportunities, not just be a shadow in a room without ever actually having responsibility, authority, autonomy. Frequently, what we see for delegation is a manager who wants to get something off their plate. They want to make it easier for themselves and they hand it to somebody else. Sometimes they even teach them thoroughly how to do it because they just don't want to do that anymore. The intention behind why you delegate things is important too. And last but not least, it's not a threat. Delegation is not a threat to your authority and legitimacy. Oftentimes we find managers who are afraid to delegate because they perceive it to be a threat to the scope of power and influence that they have. When Gallup looked at fast-growing companies, the leaders who were strong delegators grew faster and brought in more revenue than the ones who held on to their power, something that SVP of sales might want to think about. Delegation is not you being generous. It's you refusing to be the ceiling that caps your people and your team's potential. What we're going to continue to explore is that delegation requires work from you until you've developed the person or persons sufficiently that you collectively know the expectation, the process, how to get to a minimum viable product, what good really looks like, what outcomes are acceptable. That takes time and collaboration as part of your delegation. Speaking of collaboration, let's talk about that a little bit, because we might assume as we look at how hard delegation is to get right, that the answer is, well, let's just have everybody collaborate all the time. That will ensure that things get done. It will determine who does what. Well, I've got some news for you. Most managers are blurring the two anyway. They stay knee deep in everything, but they call it collaboration, and they end up becoming the bottleneck. Or they fling some messy shared problem at a person or a team and call it delegation. And usually that falls apart too. We'll see some research to support that. Oftentimes, our idea of collaboration is quite muddied. Researchers at the University of Virginia and Wharton collaborated comically on a project to study collaboration and had some interesting, though not terribly surprising, findings that they published in the Harvard Business Review. What they found is that we've made up these kind of messy categories for collaborative work, and that includes email and messaging systems, meetings, team assignments, and often groupthink to make decisions as a way to kind of pad or soften our accountability. We think collaboration is better than clean-cut delegation, but essentially we end up making most people too busy and we burn out our most helpful, most competent people because they get pulled into everything. And you know this person, right? Think about the people in your organization. There's that one product engineer or that master client executive. They've typically been around for a while and single-handedly they've streamlined all the processes, or they have all the knowledge and it's in their brain, and so we're constantly going to them and seeking their input and guidance. They know the ins and outs of things when nobody else does. Their calendar is always booked and they really want to be helpful, but they're so busy. And that's the person that we tend to harm the most. If we're not careful, they really get burnt out. So a lot of our managers and leaders think they're taking the right course of action by pulling everyone together to tackle an initiative, particularly when it's urgent or there's a sense of overwhelm. The reflex is to get as many people as possible, get them into a room and say, here's what we're dealing with, let's go. It may feel like collaboration, but the reverse is almost always true. You would have been in better shape if you delegated one owner, canceled that meeting, and had that owner go after the problem, pulling in people as needed. Because quality collaboration is actually not about coordination. It's not splitting pieces of work between people and trying to fit them together. It's not about looping people in. That can be a consideration, but you don't need a meeting with a lot of people because that tends to water down people's interest, their activity, their engagement. Collaboration is sharing a problem where no single person knows the whole answer and you need other people to help get to that answer or get to that solution. No one person can do it alone. If one person can own it and solve it, that's delegation done. You don't need to have a lot of other people involved. You may want some information and communication loops. But if the problem needs several minds working on it, that's collaboration. And yes, it's true. You might delegate a task or an initiative to someone for ownership while they are leading that group of individuals who are going to collaborate to help achieve it. Some best practices for collaboration. It's scoping before you get people together. So naming the problem and the decision that you're trying to drive to, what done might look like. You should have this individually kind of conceptualized in your mind. Then when you pull people together in a collaborative group, speak that out loud. Let other people inform it. So the group ends up understanding the scope and agreeing to that scope. And when doing this, you want the fewest people possible. More voices don't make for more collaboration. It tends to make for less ownership and buy-in. In that UVA Wharton research, they found that a small group, 3 to 5% of people, typically do 20 to 35% of the value-added collaboration, and they burn out because they get pulled into everything. So those are the people that you want to protect. They don't need to be invited and expected to come to every meeting. We need them for certain elements of information, maybe to look at the whole combined solution and give input, but not every single meeting. Keep one owner. Even though the thinking is collaborative and shared, shared thinking doesn't mean shared accountability. So you still need somebody who owns the outcome and makes the final call or decision. When researchers studied cross-functional teams, they found that 3 and 4 of them typically missed on budget, schedule, or goals. And that was because no single person was accountable. So they all had expectations that somebody else was going to take care of things, or they missed information because they were all looking at it in piece parts. So the fix to that is typically a single accountable owner. In collaboration, it also needs to be safe to disagree. Or else you're not collaborating. You're just bringing people into the room, telling them what you expect and having them run and chase it. The point behind collaboration is to create some friction or pushback, to have half-formed ideas really get challenged so that you can work through them. If people are just nodding along to what you say, you've either got compliance or possibly apathy. You want to ask real questions, make room for people who disagree, and allow those ideas to really help you get to the best possible solution. That's what we call peopleship, where your leadership is shaping how people experience work. So they bring their best thinking and attitude to the conversation. And as you reach solutions and outcomes in this collaboration, you want to make sure there is a decision and a handoff. What's next? Who owns it? Because otherwise, all this work you've collaborated on tends to fall apart because people think somebody else is going to take the ball and run with it. At Boss at the Helm, we teach the Helm Method, which is a practical framework, a tool that you keep handy to help you lead intentionally. It has 3 primary steps, and it always starts with your intention. So you're starting with yourself, you get self-aware, and then you set an intention. In this case, our intention is, how do we want to lead? Do we want to be a great delegator? Do we want to collaborate? Decide which direction you're going in and name it. When you do, notice your own pull or tendency, some of those underlying hints and feelings. When you think about handing this work off, delegating it, what happens? Does it feel easier? Do you tense up? Do you want to stay in it? Does letting go feel like losing control? Do you by chance really not want to do this work and so handing it off feels great? You let somebody else deal with it? If you're looking at collaboration as a better fit, is that because you truly need to contribute and stay involved? Or are you potentially afraid to release control? The reaction is the thing we want you to look at and just notice it and become aware of it, because that informs how you delegate and collaborate and lead. So you've set your intention. You've aimed to be a great delegator. If you're delegating, hand over the task and the decision. And when doing so, talk about the outcomes. Spend a little bit of time envisioning it together. Encourage questions. Get clear on the why, the constraints, the timeline, the resources, what done might look like. And if you can't define that at the start, if it's too nebulous, then agree on what are some of the decision gates where you're going to check in and talk about progress and how things are going. Waiting too long to connect just makes people liable to be accountable for mistakes and failures that you might have been able to prevent by providing more guidance and insight and resources earlier on in the process. You also want to discuss accountability. When you delegate, they own the outcome. You're there for support. Now, for those of you who've been with Boss at the Helm for a while, you'll know that I believe in ultimate accountability. If you're the leader, it's going to pop back to you. But as we help people develop and grow, it actually is theirs to own, but you've always got their back. Now, let me point out 2 ways that this is often handled wrong. One is that we dump something. We hand somebody a to-do with limited context, little to no authority, and then we wait till the very end and we come back and we say, this isn't what I want. What are you thinking? Waiting till the end without setting context, without helping people understand accountability, that's just going to lead to one of those situations where you're a leader walking around saying, nobody does what I want them to do, so I may as well do it myself. The other kind of leader is the opposite. They're the ones who are hovering. They say they've handed over the responsibility for something, but they're directing all the small moves in between. And so the team that they've delegated to never actually learns to own anything. So you're taking action towards delegating or collaboration. And if you find yourself not quite on track with either of those, that's where the 3rd step comes in. We're constantly applying self-awareness, monitoring, being present, checking in on the situation. So the 3rd step is adjust, looking at the progress at appropriate intervals along the way, and looking at the outcome and adjusting with grace. When something is off track, you use it as an opportunity to coach and correct. If despite this process, the outcome still doesn't come out exactly the way you wanted it, you take a step back and evaluate what are the contributing factors to that? How could we do better next time? Because you'll realize that delegation and quality returns are a learning process. Your team will get stronger as you hand them more room and more flexibility and more feedback. When you tell them something is awesome, when you celebrate them for how well they're doing at handling something, taking decisions, the outcomes that they make, other people are going to pay attention. Then collectively, we learn how to do things better and you can delegate more. So let's take a look at 3 ways that you could work on implementing this week. An easy step is pick one task on your plate that somebody else could own and hand it over to them with the outcome, the context, the why, plus decision and support along the way. Now, obviously, this is somebody who reports to you, who you've had a conversation that they are ready to pick up a little bit more, and not just you handing something off to a colleague to get out of work, or you handing off something to somebody who's not ready for it or doesn't have the bandwidth. Something else you can try a little bit harder. In your next collaborative meetings, sit back and take a look around. Is this really collaboration? Does everybody need to be here? Do you need to be there? Is there another owner who could pick up this work and you could delegate it to them and they could loop you in as appropriate? And then something a little harder to implement, take one thing that you're sure only you can do and find a qualified individual to teach them how to do that one thing that only you know how to do. If you've watched this episode and you've had some thoughts like, dang, that's me, or, oh, I have people on my team who are struggling with that, we're not that great at delegation, or we do this pretend collaboration, then you may want to go watch our lessons on delegation and accountability. Those are linked below in the description if you find them helpful. In this first episode, we've covered the basics behind delegation and collaboration just to kind of set the stage, because these are essential components to how you're going to lead alongside AI. Join us here next week. We're going to take this a step further into collaboration from the lens of cross-functional collaboration, working with other teams and departments and divisions in your organization. It's one of the ways you truly exhibit leadership to the senior and executive team in your company. Thank you for being here. If this was helpful, please hit like and consider sharing it with somebody. Invite somebody to learn alongside with you during this series. Now is a great time to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Lead yourself, then lead others. Be a boss. We'll see you next week.